Welcome to Poirot Stories, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot brings captivating mysteries to life.
Imagine a grand English manor, its opulent halls hiding a deadly secret. A scream pierces the night. Sir Reginald Ashbourne, a ruthless financier, lies dead, a family heirloom plunged into his back. $1 million in bonds locked in his safe have vanished without a trace. Who among the glittering guests, his debt-ridden nephew, his nervous niece-in-law, his scheming business partner, or his loyal secretary wields the heart of a killer? A single rose petal, a smudged fingerprint, a missing glass. What do they conceal? Enter Hercule Poirot, the brilliant Belgian detective whose little gray cells will unravel a web of betrayal, love, and vengeance. Will the truth emerge before the killer strikes again? Dive into Hercule Poirot's Bandit, the $1 Million Bond Robbery, a classic Agatha Christie-style mystery where every clue counts, every suspect hides a secret, and the final twist will leave you breathless. Chapter 1. The Glitter of Bonds. The late summer sun cast a golden sheen over the manicured lawns of Greystone Manor, a sprawling estate nestled in the rolling hills of Kent. The air was thick with the scent of blooming roses and the distant hum of bees. A deceptive tranquility that masked the undercurrents of ambition and avarice swirling within the manor's ivy-clad walls. The occasion was the annual gathering of the Ashbourne family, a ritual of opulence and obligation that drew together a constellation of relatives, associates, and hangers-on, all orbiting the formidable figure of Sir Reginald Ashbourne, financier extraordinaire and master of the manor. The drawing-room, with its high ceilings and heavy velvet drapes, buzzed with polite conversation. Crystal chandeliers gleamed above, reflecting the flicker of candlelight and the sparkle of champagne flutes. Sir Reginald, a wiry man in his 60s with a hawk-like nose and eyes that missed nothing, stood at the center of the room, holding court. His latest triumph, a $1 million bond deal with an American consortium, had elevated his status to near-mythic proportions in financial circles. The bonds, secured in a locked safe in his study, were the talk of the evening, their value whispered like a sacred secret. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal observer, stood near a marble fireplace, nursing a glass of port. His military bearing and earnest demeanor made him a curious figure among the polished guests, yet his presence was unremarkable, a familiar accessory to such gatherings. Hastings had been invited at the behest of Sir Reginald's niece, Eleanor Ashbourne, a vivacious woman whose charm concealed a sharp intellect. She had hinted at family matters requiring a discreet eye, though she had been maddeningly vague. Hastings, always susceptible to a damsel's plea, had agreed to attend, hoping to glean more. The guests were a study in contrasts. Eleanor, in a sapphire gown, flitted between groups, her laughter bright but her eyes watchful. Her brother, Lionel Ashbourne, a brooding man in his 30s, leaned against a bookcase, his dark suit rumpled and his expression sour. Lionel's reputation as a gambler preceded him, his debts a poorly kept secret. Beside him stood his wife Clara, a pale beauty whose nervous glances suggested a woman perpetually on edge. Sir Reginald's business partner, Mr. Victor Crane, a portly American with a booming laugh, regaled a cluster of guests with tales of Wall Street. His wife, Mrs. Beatrice Crane, a statuesque woman with a penchant for emeralds, listened with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Then there was Miss Lavinia Gray, Sir Reginald's private secretary, a mousy woman in her 40s whose spectacles and dowdy attire belied a mind as sharp as her employer's. She hovered near the edge of the room, her notebook clutched like a shield. Dr. Harold Mortimer, the family physician, a man of quiet dignity and graying temples, conversed with Lady Margaret Ashbourne, Sir Reginald's widowed sister-in-law, whose sharp tongue was matched only by her sharper memory. Rounding out the circle was Mr. Percy Vale, a young solicitor with slicked-back hair and an air of ambition, tasked with overseeing the legalities of the bond deal. The evening proceeded with the rhythm of a well-rehearsed play. Dinner was served in the grand dining hall where silver gleamed and the clink of cutlery punctuated conversations about stocks, society, and scandal. Sir Reginald, at the head of the table, spoke of the bonds with a fervor that bordered on obsession. $1 million, he declared, his voice carrying over the murmur of voices. Secured in my study, safe as the Bank of England. Tomorrow they will be transferred to London and our fortunes will soar. Hastings noted the reactions. Lionel's jaw tightened, Clara's fork paused mid-air, and Victor Crane's laugh faltered. Miss Grey scribbled something in her notebook, her lips pursed. Lady Margaret raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. Only Percy Vale seemed unperturbed, his smile as polished as the silverware. As the clock struck 10, the party retired to the drawing room for coffee. Hastings, ever observant, noticed Sir Reginald slip away, presumably to check on his precious bonds. The room grew quieter, the guests dispersing to card tables or private conversations. Eleanor approached Hastings, her eyes glinting with urgency. "Captain," she whispered, "I fear something is amiss. Uncle has been secretive, and Lionel is in one of his moods. Will you keep an eye out?" Before Hastings could respond, a piercing scream shattered the calm. It came from the direction of the study. The guests froze, their faces a gallery of shock and curiosity. Hastings, his instincts honed by years of adventure, was the first to move, striding toward the sound. The others followed, a tide of silk and satin surging down the corridor. The study door stood ajar. Inside, Sir Reginald lay slumped over his desk at a letter opener protruding from his back. Blood pooled on the mahogany, staining the papers beneath him. The safe, its door wide open, was empty. The million-dollar bonds were gone. Gasps filled the room. Clara swayed, clutching Lionel's arm. Victor Crane swore under his breath while Beatrice gripped her emeralds as if they might vanish next. Miss Grey's notebook fell to the floor, her face ashen. Lady Margaret's voice cut through the chaos. "Murder! And robbery! Someone call the police!" Hastings knelt beside the body, his heart racing. The letter opener was ornate, its handle engraved with the Ashbourne crest. Sir Reginald's eyes were open, frozen in a look of surprise. The room, with its heavy curtains and shelves of leather-bound books, felt suffocating. Hastings noted the details. A half-empty glass of brandy on the desk, a smudged fingerprint on the safe's handle, a single rose petal on the floor near the window. The local constable, a bumbling man named Inspector Japp, arrived within the hour. His initial assessment was predictably blunt. Robbery gone wrong. Someone wanted those bonds and didn't care who got in the way. He eyed Lionel, whose debts were no secret, with suspicion. We'll need statements from everyone. No one leaves the manor. As the guests were herded back to the drawing room, Hastings felt a familiar stir of excitement. This was no ordinary crime. The precision of the murder, the audacity of the theft, the closed circle of suspects. It was a puzzle worthy of a master, and he knew just the man to solve it. That night, as the manor settled into an uneasy silence, Hastings penned a telegram to his old friend, Hercule Poirot. The Belgian detective, with his fastidious habits and unparalleled mind, was in London, likely sipping tisane and lamenting the state of modern manners. Hastings smiled as he wrote, "Murder and theft at Greystone Manor. Bonds worth $1 million stolen. Your grey cells needed urgently. Come at once." The stage was set. The players were assembled. And somewhere among them a killer lurked, believing themselves cleverer than Hercule Poirot. Hastings knew better. The little Belgian would unravel this knot of deceit, thread by thread, until the truth lay bare. For now the manor held its secrets, but not for long. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Suspicion. The morning after the murder at Greystone Manor dawned with a heavy mist that clung to the Kentish hills, shrouding the estate in an eerie veil. Inside, the atmosphere was no less oppressive. The guests, confined to the manor by Inspector Japp's orders, moved through the grand halls with the wariness of caged animals. Breakfast was a somber affair, the clink of porcelain and the murmur of strained pleasantries barely masking the tension that hung like a storm cloud. Sir Reginald Ashbourne's absence was a palpable void, his murder and the theft of the $1 million bonds casting long shadows over every conversation. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated at the dining table with a cup of cooling tea, observed the gathered company with a keen eye. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind: the scream, the blood, the empty safe. He had slept fitfully, haunted by the image of Sir Reginald's lifeless form and the audacity of the crime. The telegram to Hercule Poirot had been sent at dawn, and Hastings clung to the hope that his friend's arrival would bring clarity to the chaos. Inspector Japp, bustling with the self-important air of a man who believed himself in command, had set up a makeshift headquarters in the library. His men, local constables with more enthusiasm than expertise, were combing the study for clues, though Hastings suspected they would overlook the subtleties that Poirot would seize upon. Japp's theory, loudly proclaimed over breakfast, was that the murder was a robbery gone awry, with Lionel Ashbourne as the prime suspect. "Debts up to his ears," Japp had muttered, casting a pointed glance at Lionel, who sat glowering at the far end of the table. "Motive as clear as day." Lionel, his face pale and his eyes bloodshot, pushed his plate away untouched. His wife, Clara, sat beside him, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief into knots. Across the table, Eleanor Ashbourne maintained a veneer of composure, though her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted her teacup. Victor Crane, the American financier, attempted to lighten the mood with a forced jest about the weather, but his wife, Beatrice, silenced him with a sharp look. Miss Lavinia Gray, Sir Reginald's secretary, ate in silence, her spectacles glinting as she darted glances around the room. Lady Margaret Ashbourne, regal in black mourning attire, presided over the table with the air of a queen in exile, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Percy Vale, the solicitor, scribbled notes in a leather-bound journal, his expression unreadable. The discovery of the crime had unfolded with grim precision the previous night. At 10:15 p.m., the scream, later identified as Clara's, had drawn the household to the study. Sir Reginald had been found at 10:20 p.m., the letter opener still in his back. The safe, a sturdy iron contraption built into the wall, had been opened without signs of forced entry, suggesting the thief knew the combination. The bonds meticulously catalogued by Miss Gray earlier that day were gone without a trace. The study's window, slightly ajar, overlooked a rose garden, and the single petal Hastings had noticed hinted at an intruder's path, or a clever misdirection. As breakfast concluded, Japp summoned the guests to the library for questioning. Hastings lingered in the dining room, hoping to overhear something useful. Eleanor approached him, her voice low. "Captain, I trust you've sent for Monsieur Poirot. This horror is beyond us. Uncle's death, the bonds, it's all too calculated." Her eyes searched his, seeking reassurance. "He'll be here by noon," Hastings replied, patting her hand. "Poirot has a way of seeing what others miss. Have you any suspicions, Miss Ashbourne?" Eleanor hesitated, glancing toward the library. "Lionel is troubled, but he's no murderer. Clara's nerves are frayed, and Victor, he's too jovial, don't you think? As for Miss Gray, she knew Uncle's affairs better than anyone. And Percy Vale? He's ambitious, always hovering." She sighed. "But I've no proof, only feelings." Hastings nodded, filing away her observations. As Eleanor returned to the library, he made his way to the study, now cordoned off by a constable. Slipping past with a nod, he examined the scene anew. The blood on the desk had dried, the brandy glass untouched since last night. The smudged fingerprint on the safe's handle intrigued him. Too obvious, perhaps. The rose petal, still on the floor, seemed out of place at the orderly room. Hastings crouched, noting its freshness. It could not have been there long. At precisely 11:45 a.m., a commotion at the front door announced Hercule Poirot's arrival. Hastings hurried to greet him, relief washing over him at the sight of the small, immaculate figure in a perfectly tailored suit, his mustache waxed to razor-sharp points. Poirot's green eyes sparkled with curiosity as he surveyed the manor's grand entrance. "Mon ami Hastings," he said, his voice a melodic blend of warmth and precision. "You have summoned me to a most intriguing affair. A murder, a theft, and a house full of secrets, n'est-ce pas?" "Exactly so," Hastings replied, leading Poirot to the library. "Sir Reginald Ashbourne, stabbed in his study, $1 million in bonds stolen from his safe. Japp thinks it's Lionel, but I'm not so sure." Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. The good Inspector Japp, always so quick to seize the obvious. "But we, Hastings, shall look deeper. The little gray cells, they are already at work." He paused, adjusting his cuffs. "Tell me, what is the order of events? And who are these players in our little drama?" Hastings recounted the evening, the dinner, Sir Reginald's departure to the study, the scream at 10:15 p.m., the discovery of the body and the missing bonds. He described the suspects, Lionel's debts, Clara's nerves, Eleanor's watchfulness, Victor's bluster, Beatrice's coldness, Miss Gray's efficiency, Lady Margaret's sharpness, and Percy Vale's ambition. Poirot listened, his head tilted, his fingers steepled. "Bon," he said at last. "A closed circle as I like it. A safe opened without force, a murder with a family heirloom, a petal where none should be." Already the contradictions whisper to Poirot. He glanced at the library door where Japp's voice boomed, interrogating Lionel. "Let us join the good inspector, but first the study. I must see the stage of this crime." In the study, Poirot moved with the grace of a cat, his eyes darting over every detail. He examined the letter opener, noting its weight and the crest. "A weapon of opportunity or chosen for its significance," he murmured. The safe drew his attention next. He ran a gloved finger over the smudged handle. "This fingerprint, it is too convenient, non. A clumsy thief or a clever one?" The brandy glass intrigued him. He sniffed it delicately, his brow furrowing. "And this petal," he said, picking it up with tweezers, "it is fresh from the garden outside. Yet the window was barely open. Curious." As they left the study, Poirot's demeanor shifted to one of quiet authority. In the library, Japp was grilling Lionel, who protested his innocence with increasing desperation. "I was in the drawing room playing cards with Percy Vale," Lionel snapped. "Ask him," Poirot interjected smoothly. "Monsieur Japp, if I may, I am Hercule Poirot, and I am here to assist. Let us proceed methodically. I wish to speak with each person present last night. Their words, their gestures, their lies, they will tell us much." Japp, flustered but deferential, agreed. Poirot began with Clara, who sat trembling in a corner. "Madame," he said gently, "you screamed." "Why were you in the corridor at 10:15? Clara's eyes widened. I was fetching my shawl from the drawing room. I heard a noise, a thud from the study. I opened the door and saw him." Her voice broke. Poirot nodded, his gaze piercing. "And you saw no one else? No shadow, no movement?" "No," she whispered, but her fingers tightened on the handkerchief. As Poirot moved to the next suspect, Hastings watched in awe. The little Belgian's questions were deceptively simple, yet each probed a hidden nerve. The manor's secrets were beginning to stir, and Hastings knew that Poirot's methodical mind would soon uncover the truth, or provoke the killer into a fatal mistake. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Order. The library of Greystone Manor, with its towering bookshelves and the faint scent of old leather, had become a stage for suspicion. The heavy oak table, littered with Inspector Japp's notebooks and half-empty teacups, bore witness to the morning's interrogations. The guests, confined to the manor by the mist and the law, shifted uneasily in their seats, their faces a gallery of apprehension and defiance. Hercule Poirot's arrival had stirred the air like a breeze before a storm, and Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near a window overlooking the shrouded gardens, felt a familiar thrill. Poirot's presence promised order amid chaos, a methodical unraveling of the tangled threads of murder and theft. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small stature belied by an aura of command. His suit was impeccable, his mustache a work of art, and his green eyes gleamed with the intensity of a man who saw not just people but their secrets. Inspector Japp, hovering nearby, seemed both relieved and irritated by Poirot's intervention. "Monsieur Poirot," Japp said, his tone grudging, "I've got statements from everyone. Lionel Ashbourne's alibi is shaky, and those debts of his, well, they're motive enough. But if you've got some fancy ideas, I'm all ears." Poirot's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Fancy, mon ami. No, I seek only the truth, which is never fancy, but always precise. Let us review the order of events, and then I shall speak with each of our friends." He turned to the assembled company, his gaze sweeping over them like a searchlight. "A murder at 10:15 p.m., a theft of bonds worth $1 million, a safe opened without force, and a letter opener bearing the Ashbourne crest. These are not accidents. They are the work of a mind, perhaps a clever one, perhaps a desperate one." Hastings, ever the dutiful chronicler, had jotted down the key details in his notebook. The scream, Clara's at 10:15 p.m. The discovery of Sir Reginald's body, 10:20 p.m. The empty safe, the smudged fingerprint, the rose petal, and the brandy glass. He shared these with Poirot, who nodded thoughtfully. Bon, Hastings, you have the facts, but it is the connections between them that will speak. Let us begin. Poirot's first subject was Eleanor Ashbourne, who sat with her hands folded, her sapphire gown replaced by a somber gray dress. Her composure was admirable, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of anxiety. Mademoiselle, Poirot began, his voice smooth as velvet, you were in the drawing-room when the scream was heard. Tell me, what did you see before that moment? The smallest detail, it matters. Eleanor's brow furrowed. I was playing bridge with Dr. Mortimer and Lady Margaret. Lionel and Percy Vale were at another table, and Clara had just left to fetch her shawl. Victor and Beatrice Crane were near the fireplace, arguing quietly. I couldn't hear about what. Miss Gray was writing in her notebook, as always. Nothing seemed wrong until Clara screamed. Poirot tilted his head. And your uncle, Sir Reginald? When did he leave the drawing-room? About 10 o'clock, Eleanor replied. He said he needed to check some papers in his study. He was preoccupied all evening talking about the bonds. Poirot nodded, his fingers brushing his moustache. Merci, mademoiselle. You are most observant. He turned to Victor Crane, whose ruddy face was less jovial than the previous night. Monsieur Crane, you are a man of business. You knew the value of these bonds. Tell me, where were you at 10:15? Crane shifted in his seat, his laugh forced. Right where Eleanor said, by the fireplace with Beatrice. We were discussing investments. I didn't see Reginald after dinner. A damn shame, this business. Beatrice Crane, her emeralds glinting in the dim light, added coolly, my husband speaks the truth. We were together. I saw nothing unusual, though I did notice Clara seemed agitated when she left the room. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Agitated, madame? In what way? Beatrice hesitated, her fingers toying with her necklace. She was pale, fidgeting. I thought perhaps she and Lionel had quarreled again. Clara, overhearing, flushed. That's not true. I was perfectly fine until I found him. Her voice trembled, and Lionel placed a protective hand on her arm. Poirot moved on, questioning each guest with a precision that unnerved them. Lionel confirmed his card game with Percy Vale, though he admitted stepping out for a cigarette at 10:05 p.m., returning just before the scream. Percy corroborated this, his tone clipped and professional. Miss Gray, her voice steady, claimed to have been in the drawing-room all evening, noting the time of Sir Reginald's departure in her notebook. 10:02 p.m. Lady Margaret, with a haughty sniff, declared she had been winning at bridge and noticed nothing amiss. Dr. Mortimer, calm and measured, confirmed the bridge game and added that he had seen Sir Reginald earlier looking unusually tense. As the interviews concluded, Poirot stepped back, his expression inscrutable. Each of you has a story, and yet, mes amis, the stories do not quite align. There are gaps, little shadows where the truth hides. He turned to Jap. Inspector, may I examine the alibis more closely? A timeline. It is essential. Jap, grumbling, produced a list of statements. Poirot studied it, his eyes flickering with interest. At 10 p.m., Sir Reginald leaves the drawing-room. At 10:05, Monsieur Lionel steps out for a cigarette. At 10:15, Madame Clara screams. And yet the murder and theft occur in this narrow window. The safe, it was opened with the combination. Who knew it? Miss Gray spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. Only Sir Reginald and I knew the combination. I recorded it in my notebook, locked in my room each night. No one else had access." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "And yet, mademoiselle, the safe was opened. Either the thief was very clever or very trusted." He turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, let us walk the grounds. The rose petal, it calls to me." Outside, the mist had begun to lift, revealing the manicured rose garden beneath the study window. Poirot examined the soil, noting faint footprints, too faint to identify but recent. The window, slightly ajar, showed no signs of tampering. "The petal," Poirot murmured. It was inside, fresh, as if plucked that evening. Yet no one admits to entering the garden. "Curious, non?" Hastings frowned. "Could the killer have entered through the window, Poirot?" "It's possible, though risky." "Possible, oui, but not probable," Poirot replied. "The window is a distraction, I think. The petal, it is a clue or a trap." He straightened, his gaze distant. "We return to the manor, Hastings. I must think. The little gray cells, they are stirring." Back in the library, Poirot requested a map of the manor which Mrs. Gray provided. He traced the path from the drawing room to the study, noting the corridor's proximity to the garden door. "The timing, it is tight," he said. "The killer had minutes to act. This suggests planning, not impulse." As the afternoon waned, Poirot gathered the guests once more. "Mes amis," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Someone in this room knows more than they say. A word, a glance, a lie, it will betray you. Hercule Poirot does not guess. He observes, he deduces, he knows." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them. Hastings watched, his heart pounding. Poirot was setting the stage, planting seeds of doubt. The killer, whoever they were, would feel the pressure mounting. The game had begun, and Poirot, with his meticulous mind, was already several moves ahead. Chapter 4. The Art of Observation. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Greystone Manor, casting long shadows across the library's polished floor. The air was thick with the scent of old books and the faint tang of nervous perspiration as the suspects sat, their faces taut with the strain of Inspector Japp's relentless questioning and the unnerving presence of Hercule Poirot. The Belgian detective, his small frame erect and his mustache impeccably groomed, paced slowly before the oak table, his green eyes darting from one guest to another. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near a bookcase, marveled at Poirot's ability to command a room without raising his voice. The little man's calm was a weapon, disarming in its precision, and the manor's inhabitants were beginning to feel its edge. Poirot had spent the morning interviewing each suspect, his questions deceptively gentle yet piercing, like needles probing for hidden truths. Now, as the clock struck 2, he shifted his approach, turning his attention to the minutiae of the crime scene and the alibis that hung like fragile threads. "Mes amis," he began, his voice smooth and deliberate, "a crime such as this, murder and theft in one bold stroke, requires not only motive but opportunity. An opportunity, it is a matter of time and place. Let us examine these closely." Inspector Japp, standing near the fireplace with a notebook in hand, snorted softly. "Time and place, Poirot? We've got that covered. Sir Reginald was killed between 10 p.m. and 10:15 p.m., stabbed with that letter opener, and the bonds were nicked from the safe. Lionel's the one with the motive, debts up to his eyeballs. And he was out of the drawing room at 10:05 smoking, he says. Convenient, that." Poirot raised a hand, his expression serene. "Patience, Inspector. The obvious, it is often a mask for the subtle. Let us reconstruct the evening, and let us do so with the precision of a watchmaker." He turned to Miss Lavinia Gray, whose spectacles glinted as she clutched her ever-present notebook. "Mademoiselle Gray, you are the keeper of Sir Reginald's affairs. Tell me, what was the exact time you last saw him alive?" Miss Gray's voice was steady, though her fingers tightened on her notebook. "At 10:02 p.m., Monsieur Poirot. I noted it in my book as he left the drawing room. He said he was going to the study to review the bond documents. I offered to assist, but he declined." Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing. "And the combination to the safe, mademoiselle? You alone knew it besides Sir Reginald?" "Yes," she replied, her tone clipped. "It was recorded in my notebook, which I keep locked in my room. No one else could have known it." "Yet the safe was opened," Poirot mused, his gaze drifting to the others. "Curious, non?" He turned to Lionel Ashbourne, whose brooding presence seemed to darken the room. "Monsieur Lionel, you left the drawing room at 10:05 for a cigarette. Where did you go?" Lionel's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with defiance. "To the terrace, just outside the drawing room. I was back by 10:10 playing cards with Percy Vale. He'll tell you." Percy Vale, his slicked-back hair gleaming under the chandelier, nodded. "That's right, Monsieur Poirot. Lionel was with me until the scream. We were at the card table." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "And yet, Monsieur Vale, you are a solicitor, a man of details. Did you notice the time precisely when Monsieur Lionel returned?" Percy hesitated, his confidence faltering. "Well, it was just before the scream, I'd say. Around 10:10, as Lionel said." "Approximations," Poirot murmured. "They are the enemy of truth." He turned to Clara, whose pale face and trembling hands betrayed her nerves. "Madame Clara, you were in the corridor at 10:15 fetching a shawl. You heard a thud, you say, and found Sir Reginald dead. Tell me, what else did you see? A shadow, a movement, a sound?" Clara's eyes darted to Lionel, then back to Poirot. "Nothing, monsieur. Just the thud, and then I opened the door and saw him. I screamed, that's all." Poirot's gaze lingered on her, as if reading the spaces between her words. He moved on to Victor Crane, whose booming voice had grown subdued. "Monsieur Crane, you and Madame Beatrice were by the fireplace discussing investments. Did you see anyone leave the drawing room besides Monsieur Lionel and Madame Clara?" Victor rubbed his neck, his discomfort evident. "Can't say I did. Beatrice and I were engrossed. Didn't notice much else." Beatrice's voice was cool, her emeralds catching the light. "As my husband says, we were occupied. I saw Clara leave and Lionel earlier, but nothing unusual." Poirot's questions continued, each one a delicate probe into the alibis and behaviors of the guests. Lady Margaret claimed to have been engrossed in bridge, her sharp eyes missing nothing yet revealing little. Dr. Mortimer, calm and professional, confirmed the bridge game and noted Sir Reginald's tension earlier that evening. Eleanor, poised but watchful, reiterated her observations of the drawing room's dynamics. As the interviews concluded, Poirot requested to revisit the study, accompanied by Hastings and Japp. The room, now sealed by police tape, was a tableau of tragedy. The blood on the desk had darkened, the letter opener removed for evidence, but Poirot's attention was drawn to the smaller details. He knelt by the window, examining the sill. "The petal, Hastings," he said softly. "It was here, fresh, yet the garden soil shows only faint prints. The window, it was ajar, but not forced. This suggests an inside job, perhaps, or a clever ruse. He moved to the safe, its door still open, the smudged fingerprint preserved. "This mark," Poirot said. "It is deliberate, I think. A thief who leaves such a clue is either careless or cunning." He sniffed the brandy glass again, his brow furrowing. "And this brandy, it has a faint odor, not quite right. We must have it tested," Japp scoffed. "You're seeing mysteries in every shadow, Poirot. The fingerprint's Lionel's, I'd wager. He's our man." Poirot's smile was patient. "The fingerprint, it may belong to anyone or no one. A smudge is not an identity. We must look beyond to the psychology of the crime." He turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, you noted the rose petal. Tell me, what else struck you as odd?" Hastings hesitated, then ventured, "The brandy glass, Poirot. It was half full, but Sir Reginald didn't seem the type to leave a drink unfinished. And the petal. It's too perfect, like it was placed there." "Précisément," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The little details, they whisper. The petal, the glass, the timing, they form a pattern if we can see it." He straightened, his demeanor brisk. "Inspector, I require the statements of the servants. They see much, yet are often unseen." Japp grumbled but sent for the butler, Mr. Jenkins, a stooped man with a deferential air. Jenkins confirmed that the staff had been in the kitchens or their quarters, none near the study at 10:15 p.m. However, he mentioned a curious detail. A tray of glasses had been left in the corridor near the study, one missing. Poirot's eyes lit up. "A glass missing? This is most interesting. And the garden door, was it locked?" "Yes, sir," Jenkins replied. "Locked at 9 p.m., as always. Only the master had the key." Poirot nodded, dismissing Jenkins. "The net tightens, Hastings. A locked door, a missing glass, a petal inside. The killer is among us, and they are clever, but not cleverer than Poirot." As they returned to the library, Poirot addressed the guests once more. "Mes amis, the truth is like a mosaic built from tiny pieces. You have each given me a piece, but some are false. I ask you to reflect. What have you hidden? For Hercule Poirot will find it." The room grew still, the suspects exchanging wary glances. Hastings watched, his pulse quickening. Poirot was weaving his spell, unsettling the guilty, and somewhere in this circle of secrets the killer was beginning to sweat. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The mist that had cloaked Greystone Manor had lifted by late afternoon, revealing the estate's rolling lawns and the distant shimmer of the Kentish hills. Inside, however, the atmosphere remained heavy, the library a crucible of suspicion and suppressed panic. Hercule Poirot, with his immaculate suit and piercing gaze, stood like a conductor before an orchestra of secrets, orchestrating the interrogation of the suspects with a finesse that left Captain Arthur Hastings in awe. The murder of Sir Reginald Ashbourne and the theft of the million-dollar bonds had cast a net over the manor's inhabitants, and Poirot was tightening it, thread by delicate thread. Inspector Japp, his patience wearing thin, leaned against the library's fireplace, his notebook bristling with hastily scribbled notes. "It's plain as day, Poirot," he declared, his voice carrying the conviction of a man eager to close the case. Lionel Ashbourne had the motive, debts piling up, creditors breathing down his neck. He was out of the drawing room at 10:05 smoking, he claims, but that's 5 minutes unaccounted for. Plenty of time to slip into the study, stab Sir Reginald, and nab the bonds. Poirot's lips curved in a faint, almost pitying smile. Mon cher inspector, you seize upon the obvious with such enthusiasm. But the obvious, it is often a red herring designed to distract. Monsieur Lionel's debts, they are known to all, a motive too clear, perhaps, to be true. Let us look closer at the shadows behind the light. Hastings, seated near a window with his own notebook, felt a stir of excitement. Poirot's method, methodical, psychological, relentless, was already shifting the narrative. The little Belgian's questions had uncovered inconsistencies, and now, as the afternoon waned, he seemed poised to unravel the first of many deceptions. Poirot turned to the assembled guests, his eyes scanning their faces. Eleanor Ashbourne, her composure strained but intact. Lionel, his jaw tight with defiance. Clara, pale and trembling. Victor Crane, his joviality replaced by unease. Beatrice Crane, cool and unreadable. Miss Lavinia Gray, clutching her notebook like a lifeline. Lady Margaret, her sharp gaze unwavering. Dr. Mortimer, calm but watchful. And Percy Vale, his solicitor's polish beginning to crack. Each, Hastings noted, wore their guilt or innocence like a mask, and Poirot was adept at peering beneath. Let us consider, Poirot began, his voice smooth and commanding, the timeline of this crime. At 10 p.m., Sir Reginald leaves the drawing room for his study. At 10:05, Monsieur Lionel steps out for a cigarette. At 10:15, Madame Clara screams, having found Sir Reginald dead, stabbed with the letter opener, the bonds gone. The safe, opened without force, suggests knowledge of the combination. The rose petal, the smudged fingerprint, the half-full brandy glass, these are our pieces, but there is more. A missing glass from a tray in the corridor, as the butler tells us. This, it intrigues Poirot. Japp frowned. A glass? What's that got to do with anything? You're chasing shadows, Poirot. Shadows, Inspector, are where the truth often hides, Poirot replied. He turned to Clara, whose hands twisted her handkerchief into knots. Madame, you were in the corridor at 10:15 fetching your shawl. You heard a thud, you say, and found Sir Reginald, but tell me, did you see this tray of glasses? Was it disturbed? Clara's eyes widened, her voice barely audible. I don't recall. Everything happened so fast. I saw the study door ajar, heard the thud, and went in. I didn't notice any tray. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And yet the butler, Monsieur Jenkins, is certain a glass was missing. This is no small thing. A glass does not vanish without purpose. He turned to Victor Crane, whose ruddy face had lost its color. Monsieur Crane, you are a man of business, accustomed to details. Did you see anyone near the corridor, perhaps carrying a glass? Victor shifted uncomfortably. Can't say I did. Beatrice and I were by the fireplace, as I told you. Didn't notice anyone sneaking about. Beatrice's voice was sharp. Nor did I. The corridor was empty when I glanced that way, just before Clara's scream. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, then moved to Lionel. Monsieur Lionel, your cigarette break. Where exactly did you smoke? The terrace, you say, but did you see anyone near the garden door, perhaps entering or leaving? Lionel's eyes narrowed. I was on the terrace, like I said. Didn't see anyone. The garden door was locked anyway. Jenkins said so. Indeed, Poirot murmured. Locked, yet a petal from the garden found its way inside. Most curious. He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Let us consider another possibility. The letter opener, with the Ashbourne crest. It is a family heirloom. Who among you has handled it? Eleanor spoke up, her voice steady. It was always on Uncle's desk. Anyone could have picked it up. I've seen it there for years. Lady Margaret's voice cut in, sharp as a blade. A sentimental choice, perhaps, but foolish. It points to someone close to the family, or someone who wished it to seem so. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Précisément, madame. The weapon. It is chosen for a reason. To accuse, to distract, or to signify. He turned to Miss Grey. Mademoiselle, you handled Sir Reginald's papers. Did you ever move this letter opener? Miss Grey shook her head, her spectacles glinting. No, Monsieur Poirot. It was decorative, not practical. Sir Reginald used a different one for his correspondence. Poirot nodded, filing away the detail. He then requested to see the tray of glasses which Jenkins brought from the corridor. One glass was indeed missing from the set of 6, its absence glaring. Poirot examined the remaining glasses, noting a faint residue in one. This, he said, holding it up, must be tested, Inspector. It may hold a clue. Japp rolled his eyes but agreed to send the glass for analysis. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be, Poirot. Lionel's our man, motive, opportunity, and no solid alibi. Poirot's smile was patient. Motive, oui, but opportunity. Let us test this. Monsieur Lionel, you say you were back by 10:10 playing cards. Monsieur Vale confirms this, yet the scream was at 10:15. 5 minutes, it is a narrow window, but possible. However, the safe, opened without force, requires time and knowledge. Did you know the combination, Monsieur Lionel? Lionel's face reddened. No, only Uncle and Miss Grey knew it. I'm not a thief, and I'm no murderer. Clara's voice broke in, trembling. He's telling the truth. Lionel wouldn't do this. He was with me, or near me, most of the evening. Poirot's gaze softened, but his questions did not. Madame, your loyalty is admirable, but your memory, it is vague. Reflect, I beg you, every detail matters. As the questioning continued, Hastings noted the growing unease among the guests. Lionel's obvious motive made him the perfect scapegoat, but Poirot's insistence on the smaller details, the petal, the glass, the fingerprint, suggested a more intricate plot. The detective was casting a net, not to trap, but to unsettle, and Hastings could sense the killer's discomfort growing. Poirot concluded the session with a quiet warning. Mes amis, les aubergines rouges, ils nagent en abondance. But Hercule Poirot sees through the murk. Someone in this room has woven a clever web, but it will unravel. I ask you to think, what have you concealed? For the truth it cannot hide from me. As the guests dispersed, their faces a mix of relief and dread, Poirot drew Hastings aside. Mon ami, the killer has made a mistake, not in the crime, but in the cover. The petal, the glass, the timing, they point to a plan, not an impulse. We must watch and we must listen. The next lie will be their undoing. Hastings nodded, his mind racing. The manor's walls seemed to close in, each shadow hiding a secret. Poirot's little gray cells were at work, and the red herrings so carefully placed were beginning to falter under his relentless scrutiny. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The late afternoon sun bathed Greystone Manor in a golden glow, its rays piercing the tall windows of the library where tension hung as thick as the dust motes dancing in the light. Hercule Poirot, his small figure radiating quiet authority, stood before the assembled suspects, his green eyes sharp with the intensity of a man unraveling a puzzle. The murder of Sir Reginald Ashbourne and the theft of the million-dollar bonds had woven a web of suspicion, and Poirot, with his meticulous mind, was beginning to pluck at its threads. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near a bookcase with his notebook open, felt the familiar thrill of watching Poirot at work, his every gesture a step toward truth. The day had been one of relentless scrutiny. Inspector Japp, still convinced of Lionel Ashbourne's guilt, had spent the morning badgering the young man, whose sullen demeanor and well-known debts made him an easy target. But Poirot, ever wary of the obvious, had shifted his focus to the smaller details: the rose petal, the smudged fingerprint, the half-full brandy glass, and the missing glass from the corridor tray. These, he insisted, were the keys to the mystery, not the loud motives that Japp clung to like a lifeline. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice a melodic blend of calm and command. "A crime such as this is like a painting. The bold strokes, the murder, the theft, they catch the eye, but it is the fine details, the subtle shades that reveal the artist's hand. Today we examine one such detail, a clue that whispers of truth." He held up a small evidence bag within which lay the single rose petal found in the study. This petal, it is fresh from the garden outside the study window. Yet the window was barely ajar, the garden door locked. How did it come to be inside? The guests, seated in a tense semicircle, exchanged wary glances. Eleanor Ashbourne, her gray dress a stark contrast to her usual vibrancy, leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on Poirot. Lionel, his face flushed with frustration, muttered something inaudible. Clara, clutching her handkerchief, seemed on the verge of tears. Victor Crane, his joviality long gone, rubbed his hands nervously, while Beatrice's cool gaze remained fixed on the petal. Miss Lavinia Gray adjusted her spectacles, her notebook open but untouched. Lady Margaret's sharp features were unreadable, and Dr. Mortimer's calm exterior betrayed a flicker of curiosity. Percy Vale, the solicitor, scribbled a note, his expression guarded. Japp, standing near the fireplace, scoffed. "A petal, Poirot? It could have blown in or been tracked in on someone's shoe. You're making mountains out of molehills." Poirot's smile was patient, almost indulgent. "Mon cher inspector, a petal does not blow through a window barely open, nor does it cling to a shoe in a room so pristine. No, this petal was placed or dropped with purpose. Let us explore this purpose." He turned to the butler, Mr. Jenkins, who stood deferentially at the door. "Monsieur Jenkins, the rose garden. Who tends it and who has access?" Jenkins cleared his throat. "The gardener, Mr. Tompkins, tends the roses, sir. The garden is open to the family and guests during the day, but the door is locked at 9 p.m., as I said. Only Sir Reginald had the key." Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing. "And yet a fresh petal, plucked that evening, lies in the study. Tell me, was the garden door checked after the murder?" Jenkins hesitated. "Not immediately, sir. The police secured the study first, but I checked it later at Inspector Japp's request. It was locked." "Bon," Poirot murmured. "Locked, yet a petal inside. This is no accident." He turned to the guests. "Who among you visited the garden yesterday evening before 9 p.m.? Silence greeted his question, broken only by Clara's sharp intake of breath. I walked there briefly around 8 p.m., she admitted, her voice trembling. "I needed air, but I didn't pick any roses, I swear." Lionel's hand tightened on hers. "She was back inside by 8:15. I saw her." Poirot's gaze softened, but his questions did not relent. "Madame Clara, you are certain you took nothing from the garden? Not even a single petal caught in your gown?" Clara shook her head vehemently. "No, nothing. I just walked the path and returned." Poirot nodded, then turned to Eleanor. Mademoiselle, you are observant. Did you see Madame Clara return from the garden? Or anyone else near it? Eleanor's brow furrowed. I saw Clara come back, yes, around 8:15, as Lionel said. She seemed upset, but I thought it was her nerves. I didn't see anyone else in the garden. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Upset, you say? This is most interesting. He moved to the library table where a map of the manor lay spread out. Tracing the path from the garden door to the study, he murmured, The garden is close, yet the door was locked. The petal, it suggests someone entered, or wished us to think so. Hastings, watching closely, ventured a thought. Poirot, could the petal be a plant, so to speak, to make us think the killer came from outside? Précisément, Hastings, Poirot said, his voice tinged with approval. You begin to see the method. The petal is a clue, but perhaps not to the truth, perhaps to a lie. He turned to Miss Grey. Mademoiselle, you are meticulous. Did Sir Reginald ever leave roses in the study, perhaps as a decoration? Miss Grey shook her head. Never, Monsieur Poirot. He disliked flowers in his workspace. Too distracting, he said. Poirot's smile widened. Then the petal. It is an intruder in more ways than one. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Let us consider another detail. The brandy glass half full on Sir Reginald's desk. Monsieur Jenkins, who brought the brandy to the study? Jenkins replied, I did, sir, at 9:45 p.m. Sir Reginald requested it after dinner. I poured a single glass and left it on his desk. And it was half empty when we found him, Poirot mused. Yet the brandy, it has a faint odor, not quite right. Inspector, has the glass been tested? Japp nodded grudgingly. Sent it to the lab this morning. Should have results by tomorrow. Bon, Poirot said. The glass, the petal, the fingerprint. They form a pattern, but not yet clear. We must also consider the missing glass from the corridor tray. Why take a glass unless to conceal something? Beatrice Crane's voice cut in, cool and sharp. Perhaps someone was thirsty, Monsieur Poirot. Not every detail is a clue. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Perhaps, madame, but in a murder every detail is suspect until proven innocent. He turned to Dr. Mortimer. Monsieur le Docteur, you examined Sir Reginald's body, the wound. Tell me of it. Dr. Mortimer, his voice steady, replied, a single stab to the back, piercing the heart. Death was instantaneous, likely between 10 p.m. and 10:15 p.m. The letter opener was driven with force, suggesting strength or desperation. Poirot nodded. So strength or anger? The choice of weapon, it speaks of opportunity, perhaps, but also of intent. He addressed the group once more. Mes amis, the details of this crime, the petal, the glass, the weapon, they are not random. They are the fingerprints of the mind that planned this. I ask you to reflect. What have you seen or not seen that you should tell? The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words pressing on each suspect. Hastings watched their faces, Lionel's defiance, Clara's fear, Eleanor's watchfulness, Victor's unease, Beatrice's coldness, Miss Grey's rigidity, Lady Margaret's disdain, Dr. Mortimer's calm, Percy's calculation. The petal, so small a thing, had become a pivot, and Poirot was using it to tilt the balance. As the session ended, Poirot drew Hastings aside. Mon ami, the petal is our first true clue. It was placed to mislead, but it reveals more than the killer intended. We must watch the garden and the lies. The next detail will break the case open. Hastings nodded, his heart racing. The manor's secrets were stirring, and Poirot's little gray cells were closing in on the truth. one delicate clue at a time. Chapter 7. More Lies. Surface. The evening shadows stretched long across Greystone Manor, their dark fingers creeping over the polished floors and heavy drapes of the library, where the air was thick with unspoken truths. Hercule Poirot, his small frame a beacon of order amid the growing chaos, stood before the assembled suspects, his mustache immaculate and his green eyes gleaming with quiet intensity. The murder of Sir Reginald Ashbourne and the theft of the million-dollar bonds had woven a tapestry of deceit, and Poirot's relentless probing was beginning to fray its edges. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near a window with his notebook, felt the tension rising like a tide, each revelation a wave threatening to break the fragile calm. The day had been one of subtle shifts. Inspector Japp, still fixated on Lionel Ashbourne's debts, had pressed the young man hard, but Poirot's focus on the smaller details, the rose petal, the half-full brandy glass, the missing glass from the corridor tray, had cast doubt on Japp's tidy theory. The petal, Simon, particular, had become a focal point, its presence in the study a puzzle that suggested either an intruder or a deliberate misdirection. Now, as the clock struck 7, Poirot was ready to probe deeper, to unearth the lies that simmered beneath the surface of the manor's polished facade. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice a velvet blade, "a crime such as this is not merely an act of violence or greed. It is a performance, a drama staged by a mind that believes itself clever. But every performance leaves traces, words unspoken, glances betrayed, secrets buried. Tonight we uncover these secrets." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the suspects. Eleanor, her composure fraying. Lionel, his defiance tinged with desperation. Clara, her hands trembling. Victor Crane, his jovial mask slipping. Beatrice cool as ever. Miss Lavinia Gray, her notebook a shield. Lady Margaret sharp and unyielding. Dr. Mortimer calm but watchful. And Percy Vale, his solicitors Polish strained. Japp, leaning against the fireplace, muttered, "Get on with it, Poirot. Lionel's still our man. Those debts don't lie. He was out of the drawing room, and that's opportunity enough." Poirot's smile was patient. "Opportunity, Inspector, is not proof. The debts of Monsieur Lionel, they are known to all. A motive too obvious, perhaps, to be trusted. Let us look instead at the hidden motives, the secrets that bind this circle." He turned to Eleanor, whose eyes widened slightly. "Mademoiselle Ashbourne, you spoke of your uncle's preoccupation with the bonds. Did he ever confide in you about his fears, his enemies?" Eleanor hesitated, her fingers tightening on her dress. "He was guarded, Monsieur Poirot, but last week he mentioned a disagreement with Victor, Mr. Crane, about the bond deal. He said Victor was pushing for terms that favored the Americans too much. I thought it was just business talk." Victor Crane's face reddened. "Now hold on. Reginald and I had our differences, sure, but it was all above board. I didn't need to kill him to get my way." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, Monsieur Crane, a disagreement over $1 million is no small thing. Tell me, what were you discussing with Madame Beatrice by the fireplace at 10 p.m.? Beatrice answered before her husband could, her voice icy. "We were discussing our investments, as we said. Private matters, Monsieur Poirot. Surely you don't suspect us of creeping about with letter openers?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "I suspect nothing, madame. I observe, and I observe that your discussion was heated, perhaps?" He turned to Lionel, whose sullen demeanor had not softened. Monsieur Lionel, your debts are known. But tell me, did your uncle ever threaten to cut you off, to withhold your inheritance? Lionel's jaw clenched. He mentioned it, yes. Last month he said if I didn't settle my debts, he'd rewrite his will, but I didn't. Kill him. I was on the terrace, smoking and back by 10:10. Percy can vouch for me. Percy Vale nodded, his tone measured. As I said, Lionel was back before the scream. We were playing cards. Poirot's gaze lingered on Percy. And you, Monsieur Vale, a solicitor with ambitions. You handled the legalities of the bond deal. Did you ever see the combination to the safe? Percy's expression tightened. No, Monsieur Poirot, that was Miss Grey's domain. I dealt with contracts, not safes. Miss Grey, her voice steady, interjected. The combination was private, as I've said. Only Sir Reginald and I knew it, and my notebook was locked away. Poirot nodded, then turned to Clara, whose pale face seemed to crumple under his scrutiny. Madame Clara, you were upset in the garden at 8 p.m., as Mademoiselle Eleanor observed. Why? And what did you see in the corridor before the scream? Clara's hands shook, her voice barely audible. I was upset because Lionel and I had argued. He was angry about Uncle's threats. In the corridor I saw nothing, just the tray of glasses and the study door ajar. I heard the thud and found him. Poirot's eyes softened, but his question was sharp. And the tray, madame? Was it disturbed? A glass missing, perhaps? Clara's eyes widened. I don't know. I didn't look closely. Everything was a blur. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. A blur, oui, but the truth is clear to those who seek it. Let us consider. A missing glass, a rose petal, a safe opened without force. These are not accidents. They are the work of a mind that plans, that conceals. He paused, his gaze settling on Lady Margaret. Madame, you are observant, a woman of experience. Did you notice anything unusual in the drawing room, perhaps a glance, a movement? Lady Margaret's lips thinned. I noticed Clara's agitation as Eleanor did, and Victor's argument with Beatrice seemed intense. But I was focused on my bridge game. Dr. Mortimer and I were winning, weren't we, Doctor? Dr. Mortimer nodded, his voice calm. Indeed, Lady Margaret, I saw nothing out of the ordinary until the scream. Poirot's smile was faint. And yet, the ordinary often hides the extraordinary. He turned to the group. A secret has surfaced today. A disagreement between Sir Reginald and Monsieur Crane. A threat to disinherit Monsieur Lionel. But there is more, I think. Someone in this room holds a deeper motive, a hidden wound. I ask you to reflect. What have you not told? The silence was broken by a sudden sob from Clara. It's my fault, she cried, her voice cracking. Lionel and we fought because I urged him to ask Uncle for money. He refused, said it was hopeless. I was so angry I went to the garden to clear my head. But I didn't kill him, I swear. Lionel's arm went around her, his voice hoarse. Clara, stop, you've said enough. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Non, Monsieur Lionel. She has not said enough, but she has said something true. A crack in the facade. The truth, it begins to emerge. He addressed the group. The lies, they multiply, but they cannot hide forever. Hercule Poirot sees the pattern, and soon the pattern will reveal the killer. As the guests dispersed, their faces a mix of relief and dread, Poirot drew Hastings aside. Mon ami, the crack in Madame Clara's story, it is significant. Her distress, it is genuine, but her memory, it conceals something. The garden, the glass, the petal, they are linked. We must watch her closely and the others. The next lie will be their undoing." Hastings nodded, his pulse quickening. The manor's secrets were bubbling to the surface, and Poirot's little gray cells were closing in, peeling back the layers of deceit one revelation at a time. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The evening at Greystone Manor settled over the estate like a heavy cloak, the grand chandeliers casting a warm but uneasy glow over the library. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and the undercurrent of fear as the suspects gathered once more under Hercule Poirot's watchful eye. The murder of Sir Reginald Ashbourne and the theft of the million-dollar bonds had fractured the manor's polished surface, and the cracks were widening. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near a bookshelf with his notebook, felt the tension peak, sensing that the case was nearing a pivotal moment. Poirot, his small frame radiating quiet authority, seemed to sense it too, his green eyes gleaming with the intensity of a man closing in on the truth. The day had been one of mounting revelations. Clara's tearful outburst, admitting her argument with Lionel over Sir Reginald's threats to disinherit him, had shifted the dynamic, exposing raw emotions and hidden motives. Inspector Japp, still clinging to his theory of Lionel's guilt, had redoubled his efforts to pin the crime on the debt-ridden heir. But Poirot's focus remained on the subtler clues: the rose petal, the missing glass, the smudged fingerprint, and the brandy glass with its faint, suspicious odor. These, he insisted, were the threads that would unravel the killer's carefully woven tapestry. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice a blend of silk and steel, "we stand at a crossroads in this affair. A murder, a theft, a circle of secrets. Each of you holds a piece of the truth, but some hold more than others. Tonight we peel back another layer, for the heart of this crime is not only in the act but in the passions that drove it." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the suspects. Eleanor, her composure fraying at the edges. Lionel, his defiance tinged with exhaustion. Clara, her eyes red from crying. Victor Crane, his joviality replaced by unease. Beatrice, her emerald necklace glinting coldly. Miss Lavinia Gray, her notebook clutched tightly. Lady Margaret, sharp and unyielding. Dr. Mortimer, calm but observant. And Percy Vale, his solicitor's polish cracking under pressure. Japp, leaning against the fireplace, snorted. "Passions, Poirot. It's money, plain and simple. Lionel needed those bonds to clear his debts. He was out of the drawing room at 10:05, plenty of time to do the deed." Poirot's smile was patient, almost pitying. "Money, Inspector, is a motive, but not the only one. The heart, it drives the hand as much as the purse. Let us explore this heart." He turned to Clara, whose trembling had not subsided. "Madame Clara, your confession last evening was most illuminating. You urged Monsieur Lionel to ask for money, and he refused. This caused a quarrel. Tell me, what else passed between you?" Clara's voice was barely audible, her hands twisting her handkerchief. I was desperate, Monsieur Poirot. Lionel's creditors were hounding us. I thought if he could just convince Uncle Reginald. But he said it was useless, that Uncle would never help. I was so angry I went to the garden to calm myself, that's all." Lionel's hand shot out, gripping hers. "Clara, you've said enough. Don't let him twist your words." Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. "Monsieur Lionel, I twist nothing. I seek only the truth. Your wife's distress, it is genuine, but it hides something. Madame Clara, in the corridor before you screamed, did you see anyone? A shadow, a figure perhaps carrying a glass?" Clara's eyes widened, her breath catching. No. I don't think so. It was dark and I was upset. I only heard the thud and saw the study door ajar. Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to Eleanor. Mademoiselle Ashbourne, you observed Madame Clara's agitation in the garden. Did you see her return to the house or anyone else near the garden door? Eleanor's brow furrowed, her voice hesitant. I saw Clara come back, yes, around 8:15, as I said. She looked shaken. I didn't see anyone else near the garden, but I did notice Miss Grey leave the drawing room briefly, around 9:30. She said she was fetching a pen. Miss Grey's head snapped up, her spectacles glinting. I did no such thing. I was in the drawing room all evening except to lock my notebook in my room at 9 p.m. Eleanor must be mistaken. Eleanor's cheeks flushed. I'm certain, Miss Grey, I saw you step out. Poirot's smile was faint but sharp. A contradiction, Mademoiselle Grey. This is most interesting. Your notebook, it contains the safe's combination, oui, and you locked it away at 9 p.m. Tell me, where is this notebook now? Miss Grey's fingers tightened on the book in her lap. It's here, Monsieur Poirot. Always with me except when locked in my room. No one could have accessed it. Poirot's gaze lingered, then moved to Victor Crane. Monsieur Crane, your disagreement with Sir Reginald over the bond deal, was it merely business or something more personal? Victor's face reddened, his voice gruff. Business, pure and simple. Reginald wanted to play hardball with the Americans. I told him it'd cost us the deal, that's all. Beatrice's voice cut in, cool and precise. My husband is correct. It was a professional matter, nothing worth killing over. Poirot's eyes twinkled. And yet, Madame, $1 million can stir many passions. He turned to the group. A new truth emerges tonight. A lie about a movement, a hidden quarrel. But there is more, I think. Someone in this room has broken just a little. Let us see who breaks further. The silence was shattered by a sudden cry from Clara. I can't bear it, she sobbed, her face buried in her hands. I saw something. In the corridor before the scream, a shadow moving toward the garden door. I didn't tell because I was afraid it was Lionel. The room gasped, Lionel's face drained of color, his voice hoarse. Clara, what are you saying? I was on the terrace. Clara's sobs grew louder. I don't know. It was dark and I was so frightened. I thought it might have been you, but I didn't want to believe it. Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. Madame, this shadow, what was it like? A man? A woman? Tall? Short? Clara shook her head, tears streaming. I couldn't tell. It was just a shape, moving quickly. Then I heard the thud and found Uncle. Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. A shadow. It is a start. But it is not enough. We must have more. He turned to the butler, Mr. Jenkins, who stood at the door. Monsieur Jenkins, the garden door, was it locked when you checked it after the murder? Jenkins nodded. Yes, sir. Locked tight as always. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet a shadow moves toward it, a petal lies inside. The pieces, they do not fit. Yet, he addressed the group. Mes amis, Madame Clara's confession is a crack in the wall of lies. But there are more cracks to find. I ask you to reflect. What else have you seen or not seen that you must tell? As the guests dispersed, their faces a mix of shock and suspicion, Poirot drew Hastings aside. Mon ami, Clara's revelation is the turning point we needed. A shadow in the corridor. It is vague, but it points to movement, to intent. The killer is growing nervous, and the lies, they begin to crumble. We must watch Miss Grey closely. Her denial, it is too firm, too quick. Hastings nodded, his heart pounding. The Manor's secrets were spilling out, and Poirot's relentless pursuit was forcing the truth to the surface, one emotional break at a time. Chapter 9. The Trap. The night had fallen over Greystone Manor, its heavy curtains drawn against the chill of the Kentish evening, yet the library remained a crucible of tension, illuminated by the soft glow of chandeliers. Hercule Poirot, his small figure a study in precision, stood at the center of the room, his mustache impeccably waxed and his green eyes alight with the quiet intensity of a hunter closing in on his prey. The murder of Sir Reginald Ashbourne and the theft of the million-dollar bonds had woven a complex web of deceit, and Poirot's relentless probing was now poised to ensnare the guilty. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near a bookshelf with his notebook, felt the air crackle with anticipation. Clara's tearful confession of seeing a shadow in the corridor had cracked the facade of the suspect's stories, and Poirot was ready to exploit this fracture. Inspector Japp, his patience fraying, leaned against the oak table, his arms crossed. "Clara's shadow nonsense doesn't change the facts, Poirot," he grumbled. "Lionel's still our man. Debts, opportunity, and now his wife's pointing fingers at him. Let's wrap this up and arrest him." Poirot's smile was serene, almost amused. "Mon cher inspector, to rush is to stumble. Madame Clara's shadow, it is vague, oui, but it is a thread that leads us closer to the truth. Tonight we set a trap, not with force, but with the mind. The killer, they are clever, but they cannot resist the pressure of Poirot's little gray cells." He turned to the assembled suspects, their faces a gallery of unease. Eleanor, her composure brittle. Lionel, his defiance crumbling. Clara, her eyes red and fearful. Victor Crane, his joviality a distant memory. Beatrice, her coolness strained. Miss Lavinia Gray, clutching her notebook like a talisman. Lady Margaret, sharp and watchful. Dr. Mortimer, calm but tense. And Percy Vale, his solicitor's Polish fading. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice a velvet command. "We are close to the heart of this mystery. A murder at 10:15 p.m., a theft of bonds worth $1 million, a safe opened without force. A rose petal, a missing glass, a smudged fingerprint. These are the pieces of our puzzle. But it is the human heart, its passions, its secrets that holds the key. Tonight I ask you to join me in a reconstruction of the crime, to see who falters under the weight of truth." The guests exchanged wary glances, their unease palpable. Japp frowned. "A reconstruction? What's that going to prove? We've got the timeline. Sir Reginald left at 10 o'clock. Lionel was out at 10:05. Clara screamed at 10:15. The facts point to Lionel." Poirot raised a hand, his expression unyielding. "The facts, Inspector, are like stars, visible but not the whole sky. Let us place each of you where you claim to be at 10 p.m., and we shall see what the stars reveal." He gestured to the library door. "We begin in the drawing room where the evening unfolded. Follow me, s'il vous plaît." The group, reluctant but obedient, followed Poirot to the drawing room, its heavy velvet drapes and polished furniture a stark contrast to the tension within. Poirot positioned each suspect as they had described. Eleanor, Dr. Mortimer, and Lady Margaret at the bridge table. Lionel and Percy Vale at the card table. Victor and Beatrice by the fireplace. Miss Grey near the bookcase, scribbling in her notebook, and Clara briefly absent to fetch her shawl. Poirot paced the room, his eyes darting over the layout. "At 10 p.m., he said, Sir Reginald leaves for his study. Monsieur Lionel, you step out at 10:05 for a cigarette. Show us, please. Lionel, his jaw tight, walked to the terrace door and stepped outside, returning after a moment. Bon. You claim to return by 10:10, resuming cards with Monsieur Vale, correct? Percy nodded, his tone clipped. Yes, we were playing until the scream. Poirot turned to Clara. Madame, you left for your shawl at 10:12, oui? Walk the path you took. Clara, trembling, moved toward the corridor, pausing near the study door. And here you heard a thud, saw a shadow moving toward the garden door, and found Sir Reginald dead. Show us. Clara hesitated, her eyes darting to Lionel. I walked this way, she said, stepping toward the study. The door was ajar, and I saw the shadow moving that way. She pointed toward the garden door, her hand shaking. Poirot's gaze sharpened. A shadow, madam, but no face. And the tray of glasses, where was it? Jenkins, summoned to assist, pointed to a small table in the corridor where the tray had stood, one glass missing. Poirot nodded. Bon. Now let us return to the study. In the study, Poirot recreated the scene. The desk, the bloodstain, the open safe, the half-full brandy glass. He placed a chair where Sir Reginald had sat, facing the safe. The killer enters, perhaps through the door, perhaps the window. They stab Sir Reginald with the letter opener, open the safe, take the bonds. The petal lies here, he said, pointing to the floor. The window is ajar, but the garden door is locked. The killer leaves, unseen, except by Madame Clara's shadow. He turned to the group, his voice low but piercing. Mes amis, this is the moment of truth. Someone among you moved differently that night. Someone saw more or did more than they admit. I ask you now, who was the shadow? The silence was suffocating. Then, to everyone's shock, Miss Grey's voice broke the stillness, trembling but resolute. It wasn't me, Monsieur Poirot, but... I did leave the drawing-room at 9:30, as Eleanor said. I lied before. I went to my room to check my notebook, not for a pen. I was worried about the combination. The room gasped. Eleanor's eyes widened and Jap pounced. Worried? Why? Did someone get to that notebook? Miss Grey's face paled, her spectacles glinting. No, it was locked as always, but Sir Reginald had been so secretive, I feared someone might have overheard us discussing it. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And who, mademoiselle, might have overheard? Miss Grey hesitated, then whispered, Percy Vale. He was in the study with us earlier that day, going over the bond contracts. He was very curious about the safe. Percy's face flushed with anger. That's absurd. I was nowhere near the safe, and I didn't know the combination. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Yet curiosity, Monsieur Vale, can be a dangerous thing. Let us test this. Monsieur Jenkins, bring me a glass from the kitchen, one like the missing one. Jenkins complied, returning with a crystal tumbler. Poirot held it up, then placed it on the desk beside the brandy glass. The missing glass, it was taken for a reason. Perhaps to hide a substance, perhaps to replace another. Inspector, have you the results of the brandy glass analysis? Jap nodded, producing a report. Came in this afternoon, traces of a sedative in the brandy. Enough to make Sir Reginald sluggish, not enough to kill. Poirot's eyes lit up. A sedative. This changes the picture, mes amis. The killer planned not only to kill, but to ensure Sir Reginald was vulnerable. The glass, the petal, the shadow, they are parts of a careful plan. He turned to the group, his voice rising. Someone in this room drugged Sir Reginald, stabbed him, and took the bonds. The trap is set. Who will step into it?" The suspects froze, their eyes darting. Hastings watched, his heart pounding. Poirot had turned the reconstruction into a psychological snare, and the killer, whoever they were, was feeling the pressure. The trap was closing, and the next move would reveal all. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The library of Greystone Manor was a cauldron of tension, its heavy air charged with the weight of secrets about to be unveiled. The chandeliers cast a flickering glow over the assembled suspects, their faces etched with fear, defiance, or resignation. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his small stature commanding the room, his mustache gleaming like a badge of precision, and his green eyes alight with the certainty of a man who had solved the puzzle. The murder of Sir Reginald Ashbourne and the theft of the $1,000,000 bonds had led to this moment, and Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near a bookshelf with his notebook, felt his pulse quicken. Poirot's trap, set so carefully in the previous evening's reconstruction, had ensnared its prey, and now the truth would be laid bare. Inspector Japp, his skepticism softened by Poirot's relentless logic, stood near the fireplace, his arms crossed but his eyes attentive. "All right, Poirot," he said, his voice gruff but curious. "You've had your fun with petals and glasses. Let's hear it. Who killed Sir Reginald and stole those bonds?" Poirot's lips curved in a serene smile. "Mon cher Inspector, the fun, as you call it, is the work of the little gray cells. They have observed, they have deduced, and now they reveal. Mes amis," he said, turning to the suspects, Eleanor, Lionel, Clara, Victor Crane, Beatrice, Miss Lavinia Gray, Lady Margaret, Dr. Mortimer, and Percy Vale. "You have played your parts in this drama, some with truth, some with lies. But the curtain falls and the killer stands exposed." The room was silent, the suspect's eyes fixed on Poirot. Hastings leaned forward, his pen poised, knowing this was the moment Poirot lived for. The dramatic, logical unveiling of truth. "Let us reconstruct," Poirot began, his voice smooth and commanding. "At 10 p.m., Sir Reginald leaves the drawing room for his study. At 10:05, Monsieur Lionel steps out for a cigarette, returning by 10:10. At 10:12, Madame Clara leaves to fetch her shawl, hears a thud, sees a shadow, and screams at 10:15, finding Sir Reginald stabbed with the Ashbourne letter opener, the bonds gone from the safe. A rose petal lies on the floor, a glass is missing from a corridor tray. A smudged fingerprint marks the safe, and the brandy glass contains a sedative. These are our pieces, now let us fit them together." Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "The sedative in the brandy is our starting point. It was not enough to kill, but enough to slow Sir Reginald, to make him vulnerable. The brandy was poured by Monsieur Jenkins at 9:45 p.m., but the sedative was added later, by the killer. This suggests access to the study and knowledge of Sir Reginald's habits." He turned to Miss Gray, whose spectacles glinted nervously. "Mademoiselle Gray, you knew the safe's combination. You claimed your notebook was locked away, but you admitted to checking it at 9:30 p.m., fearing someone had overheard. This was a lie, was it not?" Miss Gray's face paled, her voice trembling. I was worried, yes, but I didn't lie. The notebook was secure." Poirot's smile was sharp. "No, mademoiselle, you lied to conceal your actions. You did not check your notebook. You went to the study. You were seen by Mademoiselle Eleanor leaving the drawing room. You had access, opportunity, and motive. The room gasped. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth and Japp's eyes widened. Motive? He barked. What motive? She's just a secretary. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, Inspector, let us unravel this thread. Miss Grey was more than a secretary. She was Sir Reginald's confidant, privy to his financial secrets. But she was also a woman scorned. Sir Reginald, he had promised her a share of the bond profits, a reward for years of loyalty. But he reneged, did he not, mademoiselle? You overheard him planning to cut you out, to give the profits to Monsieur Crane's American partners. Miss Grey's hands shook, her notebook slipping to the floor. That's not true. He valued my work. Poirot's voice softened, but his eyes were relentless. Valued we, but not enough. You were in the study at 9:30 adding the sedative to the brandy. You knew Sir Reginald would drink it as he always did before working. You returned to the drawing room, your absence unnoticed except by Mademoiselle Eleanor. At 10 o'clock, Sir Reginald went to the study, already feeling the sedative's effects. You slipped out again just before 10:15, using the corridor tray as cover, taking a glass to disguise your actions. Clara gasped. The shadow. It was you? Poirot nodded. Oui, Madame Clara saw you, though she could not identify you in the dark. You entered the study, stabbed Sir Reginald with the letter opener, a weapon chosen to implicate the family, and opened the safe with the combination you knew so well. The bonds, you hid them, perhaps in your room, perhaps elsewhere. The rose petal, you dropped it deliberately to suggest an intruder through the window, a clever misdirection. Miss Grey's face crumpled, her voice a whisper. No, you're wrong. Poirot's tone was unyielding. The fingerprint smudged on the safe, it was yours, wiped just enough to seem careless. The missing glass. You took it to dispose of any trace of the sedative you handled. But the petal, it was your mistake. It was too fresh, too deliberate, and the garden door was locked. You could not have come from outside. Japp stepped forward, his voice incredulous. You're saying Miss Grey, a mousy little secretary, planned all this? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The quiet ones, Inspector, they are often the most dangerous. Miss Grey's loyalty turned to betrayal when Sir Reginald broke his promise. Her knowledge of his affairs, her access to the safe, her meticulous nature, these made her the perfect architect of this crime. Miss Grey stood, her voice rising in a desperate cry. I didn't kill him. I only wanted the bonds. He was alive when I left. The room froze. Poirot's smile widened. Merci, mademoiselle. You have confessed to the theft. But the murder, it was part of your plan. The sedative ensured Sir Reginald could not resist. The letter opener, it was a message, to wound the family as he had wounded you. Miss Grey collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Japp, stunned, signaled to a constable. Take her into custody. We'll search her room for the bonds. Poirot raised a hand. One moment, Inspector. The bonds, they are hidden in the manor, likely in a place Miss Grey knew well. Check the false bottom of her desk drawer. She is meticulous, but not infallible. As the constable led Miss Grey away, her sobs echoing, the suspect sat in stunned silence. Eleanor's eyes were wide with shock, Lionel's face pale with relief, and Clara clung to his arm. Victor Crane muttered something to Beatrice, who remained impassive. Lady Margaret's lips twitched in a grim smile, and Dr. Mortimer shook his head slowly. Percy Vale's pen had stopped, his ambition momentarily forgotten. Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. Mon ami, the trap was simple: to push until the guilty broke. Miss Grey's pride in her precision betrayed her. The petal, the glass, the sedative, they were her signatures. Hastings nodded, his mind reeling. But the shadow, Poirot. Clara's story, it was so vague. Vague, oui, but true, Poirot replied. It was the pressure of truth that forced Miss Grey's confession. The little gray cells, they see what others miss. As the room emptied, Japp clapped Poirot on the shoulder. You're a marvel, Poirot. A mousy secretary. I'd never have guessed. Poirot's smile was modest. The mind, Inspector, is the true battlefield, and Hercule Poirot never loses there. The truth had been revealed, but Hastings knew the final chapter was yet to come. Poirot's reflection on the case, and the quiet exit that would leave Greystone Manor forever changed. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Greystone Manor, casting a soft, forgiving light over the library where the air still carried the weight of the previous night's revelations. The arrest of Miss Lavinia Grey had sent ripples through the household, shattering the fragile veneer of civility that had held the suspects together. Hercule Poirot, his small figure impeccable in a neatly pressed suit, stood near the oak table, his mustache a perfect crescent and his green eyes contemplative. The murder of Sir Reginald Ashbourne and the theft of the million-dollar bonds had been solved, yet Poirot's work was not complete. There was always, as Captain Arthur Hastings knew, a moment of reflection, a chance for the little Belgian to weave the threads of the case into a tapestry of human nature. Hastings, seated near a bookshelf with his notebook open, felt a quiet awe. Poirot's unraveling of the crime had been a masterclass in logic and psychology, turning the unassuming Miss Grey into the linchpin of a meticulously planned murder and theft. The bonds, as Poirot had predicted, were found in a false bottom of her desk drawer, hidden with the precision of a woman who had spent years organizing Sir Reginald's affairs. Inspector Japp, now grudgingly deferential, was overseeing the final details of Miss Grey's transfer to the local police station. But the manor remained a place of unease, its inhabitants grappling with the truth. Poirot sipped a tisane, prepared by the butler, Mr. Jenkins, and surveyed the room where the remaining guests had gathered for a final audience. Eleanor Ashbourne, her gray dress somber but her eyes bright with relief, sat beside Lionel, whose sullen demeanor had softened into quiet gratitude. Clara, her nerves steadied by her husband's arm, looked fragile but resolute. Victor Crane, his joviality returning in tentative bursts, stood near Beatrice, whose cool exterior masked a flicker of unease. Lady Margaret, sharp as ever, sat with regal poise, while Dr. Mortimer's calm presence was a steady anchor. Percy Vale, his ambitions chastened, scribbled notes perhaps for his own records rather than the case. Mes amis, Poirot began, his voice a gentle cadence. The affair of Greystone Manor is concluded, but the mind, it does not rest until it has reflected. A crime, it is not merely an act of violence or greed, it is a mirror of the human soul, revealing its desires, its fears, its betrayals. Today, Hercule Poirot shares with you the why and the how, so that you may understand. Japp, entering the room with a constable, raised an eyebrow. Reflection, Poirot? You've got your killer, the bonds are recovered, and Miss Grey's confessed to the theft. What's left to ponder? Poirot's smile was patient. The truth, Inspector, is more than a confession. It is a story, and the story of Miss Grey is one of loyalty turned to bitterness. Let us revisit the crime, not as a puzzle but as a tragedy. He set down his tisane, his hands clasped before him. Miss Lavinia Gray was a woman of precision, a shadow in Sir Reginald's world, yet indispensable. She knew his secrets, his finances, his promises, and one such promise, to share the profits of the bond deal, was broken. This betrayal, it was the spark that ignited her plan. Eleanor's voice was soft but firm. Monsieur Poirot, are you certain? Miss Gray seemed so devoted. Poirot nodded. Devotion, mademoiselle, can curdle into resentment when it is not returned. Miss Gray overheard Sir Reginald's plan to exclude her, to favor Monsieur Crane's American partners. This wound, it drove her to act. She planned with care. The sedative in the brandy, the letter opener to implicate the family, the rose petal to suggest an intruder, the smudged fingerprint to confuse. She was clever, but not clever enough to escape the little gray cells. Lionel, his voice hoarse, spoke up. But why the petal? Why such a small thing? Poirot's eyes twinkled. The petal, Monsieur Lionel, was her flourish, her misdirection. She plucked it from the garden earlier, perhaps during her duties, and placed it in the study to suggest an outside intruder. The window, slightly ajar, was meant to reinforce this. But the garden door was locked, and the petal was too fresh to have blown in. It was her mistake, a detail too perfect. Clara, her eyes still red, whispered, "And the shadow I saw, it was her?" "Oui, madame," Poirot replied gently. "You saw her moving toward the garden door, perhaps to dispose of the glass she took from the corridor tray. A glass that might have held traces of the sedative. Your fear for Monsieur Lionel clouded your certainty, but your truth broke her." Victor Crane cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "I still can't believe it. A secretary pulling this off? Reginald trusted her." Beatrice's tone was sharp. "Trust is a currency easily spent, Monsieur Poirot. Miss Gray spent it poorly." Poirot's gaze lingered on her. "Indeed, madame, and yet trust is what binds us and what betrays us. Miss Gray trusted Sir Reginald, and he betrayed her. She, in turn, betrayed him with murder and theft. It is a cycle, one that Poirot observes too often." Lady Margaret's voice cut through, dry and pointed. "A cycle, perhaps, but a preventable one. Reginald was a fool to make promises he couldn't keep." Dr. Mortimer nodded slowly. "And a fool to underestimate his secretary. She was invisible to him in a way." Poirot's smile was wistful. "Précisément, Monsieur le Docteur. The invisible they see all, and they are dangerous when wronged. Miss Gray's invisibility was her weapon until it became her undoing." Percy Vale, his pen paused, spoke up. "But the bonds! How did you know where to find them?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The false bottom of her desk drawer, Monsieur Vale. Miss Gray was meticulous but predictable. She hid the bonds where she kept her secrets, trusting her own system. Hercule Poirot, he understands such systems." Japp, now fully attentive, clapped his hands. "Well, Poirot, you've done it again. I'll admit I was wrong about Lionel, but how do you do it? See what we all miss?" Poirot's expression softened, his voice philosophical. "The little gray cells, Inspector, they see not just the facts, but the spaces between them. The glances, the hesitations, the lies that reveal the truth. Human nature, it is always the same. Greed, love, betrayal. They leave their marks, and Poirot reads them." As the guests absorbed his words, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, you have been my faithful companion in this affair. Your observations, they help to light the path, The petal, the glass, you saw their importance. Hastings flushed, pleased but modest. I only saw what you pointed out, Poirot. You're the genius. Poirot chuckled softly. Genius, non. Method, oui. And now, mes amis, Hercule Poirot takes his leave. The manor is yours again, but let it be a place of truth henceforth. With a final bow, Poirot exited the library, his steps light but purposeful. Hastings followed, his heart full of admiration. The case was closed, the killer unmasked, and the bonds recovered. But Poirot's reflection had left its mark, a reminder that even in the darkest crimes, the human heart was the true mystery. As they stepped into the morning light, Hastings glanced back at the manor, its ivy-clad walls now free of their secrets. What now, Poirot? He asked. Poirot's smile was serene. Now, mon ami, we return to London. There will be other puzzles, other hearts to understand, but for today, the little gray cells rest. Chapter 12. The Echoes of Truth. The morning sun had given way to a soft drizzle at Greystone Manor, the gentle patter of rain against the windows adding a melancholic note to the already somber atmosphere. The library, once a stage for Hercule Poirot's dramatic revelations, now felt like a room exhaling after a long-held breath. The arrest of Miss Lavinia Gray for the murder of Sir Reginald Ashbourne and the theft of the million-dollar bonds had left the household in a state of quiet shock. But the ripples of her confession still lingered. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near a bookshelf with his notebook, felt a mixture of relief and unease. Poirot's brilliance had unraveled the mystery, yet the manor's inhabitants seemed poised on the edge of new truths, as if the case had stirred deeper secrets. Hercule Poirot, his small frame as immaculate as ever, stood near the fireplace, sipping a fresh tisane prepared by the ever-attentive Mr. Jenkins. His green eyes, though calm, held a flicker of curiosity, as if the case's resolution had not entirely satisfied his insatiable mind. The bonds had been recovered from the false bottom of Miss Gray's desk drawer, and her confession, prompted by Poirot's psychological trap, had sealed her fate. Yet Poirot, Hastings knew, was never content with merely solving a crime. He sought to understand its echoes, the human frailties that lingered in its wake. The remaining guests gathered reluctantly, their faces a study in varied emotions. Eleanor Ashbourne, her relief tempered by sorrow for her uncle. Lionel, his defiance replaced by a weary gratitude. Clara, her nerves steadied but her eyes still haunted. Victor Crane, his bluster returning but subdued. Beatrice, her cool facade intact but strained. Lady Margaret, sharp and unyielding as ever. Dr. Mortimer, calm and reflective. And Percy Vale, his ambition overshadowed by the case's gravity. Inspector Japp, bustling with the satisfaction of a closed case, stood near the door, coordinating with a constable to finalize Miss Gray's transfer to London. Mes amis, Poirot began, his voice a gentle but commanding melody. The crime is solved, the guilty unmasked, the bonds recovered. Yet the heart of Greystone Manor still beats with questions, with truths unspoken. Hercule Poirot does not leave until the echoes of this affair are understood. For a crime, it is never just an act. It is a revelation of the soul. Japp, adjusting his notebook, snorted softly. Echoes, Poirot? You've got your killer. The bonds are safe and the case is closed. What more is there to dig up? Let's leave these folks to their mourning. Poirot's smile was patient, almost indulgent. Mon cher inspector, you see the surface, but Poirot sees the depths. Miss Gray's crime was born of betrayal, but betrayal does not exist in isolation. There are other secrets here, other wounds that shaped this tragedy. Let us explore them, not to accuse, but to understand. Eleanor, her voice soft but steady, spoke first. Monsieur Poirot, you've done so much already, but I can't help feeling there's more to this. Uncle was secretive, even with me. Did he provoke Miss Grey beyond what we know? Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. A perceptive question, mademoiselle. Sir Reginald, he was a man of ambition, but also of promises he did not always keep. Miss Grey's betrayal was sparked by his refusal to share the bond profits, but was this his only broken promise? He turned to Lionel, whose face tightened. Monsieur Lionel, your debts were a burden, but your uncle's threats to disinherit you, were they new or part of a pattern? Lionel hesitated, his voice low. He threatened it often. Said I was a disgrace to the family, but I didn't think he'd actually do it. I thought he was just trying to control me. Clara's hand gripped his, her voice trembling. He was cruel to Lionel, Monsieur Poirot, always holding the inheritance over him like a whip. I hated it, but I never thought it would lead to this. Poirot's gaze softened. Madame Clara, your loyalty to your husband, it is admirable. But your fear, your shadow in the corridor, it was more than fear for him, was it not? You suspected someone else, perhaps? Clara's eyes widened, her breath catching. I didn't know who it was, the shadow, it was so quick. I thought it might be Lionel, but then I wondered, could it have been someone else? Someone who knew about the safe? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Précisément. The shadow, it was Miss Grey, but your doubt, it points to the atmosphere of mistrust in this house. Sir Reginald's secrets bred suspicion, and suspicion bred betrayal. He turned to Victor Crane, whose ruddy face had lost its usual bravado. Monsieur Crane, your disagreement with Sir Reginald over the bond deal, was it truly just business, or was there a personal grudge? Victor shifted uncomfortably, his voice gruff. It was business, like I said. Reginald was stubborn, wanted to squeeze every penny from the Americans. I told him it'd ruin the deal. Nothing personal, just dollars and cents. Beatrice's voice was sharp, cutting in. My husband speaks the truth, Monsieur Poirot. Sir Reginald's greed was the issue, not Victor's. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Greed, madam, is a word that echoes through this case. Sir Reginald's greed, Miss Grey's greed, perhaps others' greed. But there is more. There is pride, and there is pain. He turned to Lady Margaret, whose sharp features were unyielding. Madam, you knew Sir Reginald's character. Did he often make promises he could not keep? Lady Margaret's lips thinned, her voice dry. My brother-in-law was a man of ambition, but not of honor. He promised many things to Miss Grey, to Lionel, to others. He used promises as currency, spending them freely and paying them rarely. Dr. Mortimer nodded slowly, his voice calm. He was a complex man, Monsieur Poirot. Generous when it suited him, ruthless when it didn't. I saw it in his treatment of his staff, his family, even his doctor. Poirot's gaze lingered on him. And you, Monsieur le Docteur, saw much. Did you ever suspect Miss Grey's resentment? Dr. Mortimer hesitated, then admitted, I noticed her growing quieter, more withdrawn in recent weeks. I thought it was overwork. I never imagined murder. Poirot nodded, his expression wistful. The human heart, it hides its wounds well. Miss Grey's resentment was a slow poison fed by years of service and a single betrayal. He turned to Percy Vale, whose pen had stilled. Monsieur Vale, you were curious about the safe, as Miss Grey said. Did you ever sense her anger? Percy's face flushed, his tone defensive. I was curious about the deal, not the safe. Miss Grey was always intense. I didn't think she'd kill. Poirot's smile was faint. Intensity, oui. It is a spark that can ignite a fire. He addressed the group, his voice rising slightly. Mes amis, the echoes of this crime are clear. Sir Reginald's broken promises created a house of mistrust where loyalty turned to betrayal. Miss Grey was the instrument, but the stage was set by all of you, by silence, by complicity, by secrets kept. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them. Hastings watched, his heart heavy. Poirot had not only solved the crime but exposed the manor's soul, its fractures laid bare. As the guests dispersed, Poirot drew Hastings aside. Mon ami, the case is closed, but the lesson remains. The human heart, it is fragile, and when broken it can destroy. We leave Greystone Manor, but its echoes will linger. Hastings nodded, his mind full of the case's complexities. You've done it again, Poirot. You saw the truth where we saw only shadows. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Shadows, Hastings, are where the truth hides, and Hercule Poirot, he always finds it. With a final glance at the manor, he turned toward the door, ready to leave its secrets behind. Chapter 13. The Hidden Motive. The drizzle that had cloaked Greystone Manor had softened into a fine mist by midday, lending the estate an ethereal quality, as if it were caught between reality and memory. Inside the library, the air remained heavy with the aftermath of Miss Lavinia Grey's confession, her arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Ashbourne and the theft of the million-dollar bonds still reverberating through the household. Hercule Poirot, his small frame a beacon of precision, stood near a tall window, his green eyes reflective as they gazed out at the mist-shrouded gardens. The case was solved, the bonds recovered, yet Poirot's restless mind seemed to sense an unfinished thread, a hidden motive lurking beneath the surface. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated at the oak table with his notebook, felt a stir of anticipation. Poirot's reflections often uncovered deeper truths, and this morning promised no less. The suspects, though no longer under suspicion, gathered with a mix of relief and unease. Eleanor Ashbourne, her face pale but composed, sat with a quiet dignity. Lionel, his earlier defiance replaced by a weary gratitude, held Clara's hand. Her nerves steadied, but her eyes haunted by the ordeal. Victor Crane, his bluster returning in fits and starts, stood near Beatrice, whose cool demeanor masked a flicker of disquiet. Lady Margaret, sharp and unyielding, surveyed the room with her piercing gaze, while Dr. Mortimer's calm presence belied a thoughtful intensity. Percy Vale, his ambitions subdued, sat with a blank notebook, his earlier confidence shaken. Inspector Japp, bustling with the satisfaction of a closed case, was preparing to depart for London. But Poirot had requested one final gathering. Mes amis, Poirot began, his voice a gentle but commanding melody. The crime at Greystone Manor is solved, the guilty unmasked, the bonds returned. Yet Hercule Poirot does not leave a puzzle until every piece is placed, not just the pieces of evidence, but the pieces of the human heart. There is a motive, a hidden truth that we have not yet fully explored. Today we shine a light upon it. Japp, adjusting his coat near the door, raised an eyebrow. More motives, Poirot? You've got Miss Grey dead to rights, jealousy, betrayal, greed. What else is there to dig up? Let's let these people get on with their lives. Poirot's smile was serene but resolute. Mon cher inspector, the surface motive, Miss Grey's resentment over a broken promise, it is true, but it is not the whole truth. A crime such as this, it is like an onion with layers to peel. Beneath her betrayal lies a deeper wound, one that touches others in this room. Let us explore this wound. Eleanor, her voice soft but curious, spoke first. Monsieur Poirot, you've already done so much. But are you saying there's more to Miss Grey's actions? Something we missed? Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. Précisément, mademoiselle. Miss Grey's crime was sparked by Sir Reginald's betrayal, but why did she feel so deeply wounded? Her devotion to him was not merely professional, it was personal, a loyalty that went beyond duty, perhaps even to love. The room gasped, and Hastings' pen froze, his mind reeling at the implication. Lionel's brow furrowed, his voice sharp. Love? Miss Grey and Uncle Reginald? That's absurd. Poirot raised a hand, his expression calm. Not absurd, Monsieur Lionel, but human. Miss Grey, she was invisible to many, but to Sir Reginald she was indispensable. Over years, her loyalty grew into something deeper, a silent devotion, unacknowledged by him. When he promised her a share of the bond profits, it was not just money she sought, but recognition, a place in his world. His betrayal, it was not only of a promise, but of her heart. Clara's eyes widened, her voice trembling. You mean, she loved him and he didn't care? Poirot's gaze softened. Oui, madame. And this wound, it drove her to madness. The sedative in the brandy, the letter opener, the stolen bonds, these were not just acts of greed, but of vengeance, a cry from a heart broken by indifference. Beatrice Crane's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. That's all very poetic, Monsieur Poirot, but how do you know this? Miss Grey never said a word about love. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The heart, madame, speaks in silence. Miss Grey's meticulous nature, her years of service, her withdrawal in recent weeks. These were signs noted by Monsieur le Docteur and others. Her lie about the notebook, her quick denial of leaving the drawing room. These were the actions of a woman protecting not just her crime, but her pain. Dr. Mortimer nodded slowly, his voice thoughtful. I did notice her change, Monsieur Poirot. She was quieter, more distracted. I thought it was fatigue, but perhaps it was more. Lady Margaret's lips thinned, her tone dry. Reginald had a talent for inspiring devotion and then discarding it. If Miss Grey loved him, she was not the first to suffer. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Indeed, madame, and this pattern, it touches others in this room. Monsieur Lionel, your uncle's threats to disinherit you, were they not also a form of betrayal? A rejection of family? He turned to Victor Crane. And you, monsieur, your disagreement over the bond deal, was it not also a wound to your pride, to be dismissed by Sir Reginald? Victor's face reddened, but he nodded. He was a hard man to deal with, always had to have the upper hand. Poirot's voice rose slightly, commanding attention. Mes amis, the hidden motive in this crime is betrayal, a chain of broken promises that led to murder. Miss Grey was the instrument, but Sir Reginald's actions set the stage. His indifference, his ambition, his control. They sowed the seeds of this tragedy. Percy Vale, his voice hesitant, spoke up. But Monsieur Poirot, if it was about love, why the bonds, why steal them? Poirot's gaze was piercing. The bonds, Monsieur Vale, were her final act of defiance, to take what Sir Reginald valued most, to hurt him as he had hurt her. But she could not destroy them. They were her security, her escape. She hid them, believing she could vanish. But Hercule Poirot, he does not allow the guilty to vanish. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them. Hastings watched, his heart heavy with the tragedy of it all. Miss Grey's crime was not just greed, but a desperate act of a wounded heart. And Poirot had seen it where others saw only theft. As the guests absorbed the revelation, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, the hidden motive, it is always the key. The little gray cells, they see the pain behind the act, the love behind the hate. This is why we solve crimes, not just to punish, but to understand." Hastings nodded, his voice low. "It's a sad story. Poirot, she could have been so much more." Poirot's smile was wistful. "Oui, Hastings, but the heart, it leads us to greatness or to ruin. Miss Grey chose ruin." He turned to the group, his voice gentle but firm. "Mes amis, let this be a lesson. Betrayal breeds betrayal, but truth can heal. Live with truth, and Greystone Manor may yet find peace." As the gathering dispersed, Japp clapped Poirot on the shoulder. "You're a marvel, Poirot. Turning a murder into a morality tale. I'll stick to arrests." Poirot chuckled softly. "And I, Inspector, will stick to the truth." With a final bow, he prepared to depart, leaving the manor to its healing and its ghosts. Chapter 14. The Final Threads. The mist that had shrouded Greystone Manor had cleared by late morning, leaving the Kentish estate bathed in a pale, almost apologetic sunlight. The library, with its towering bookshelves and lingering scent of old leather, felt quieter now, as if the resolution of Sir Reginald Ashbourne's murder and the recovery of the million-dollar bonds had drained the room of its earlier tension. Yet a subtle undercurrent of unease remained, as if the manor's walls still whispered of secrets not fully laid bare. Hercule Poirot, his small figure immaculate in a perfectly tailored suit, stood near the oak table, his mustache a precise crescent and his green eyes reflective. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated with his notebook, sensed that Poirot was not yet ready to close the case entirely. There were still threads to tie, final truths to illuminate. The suspects, now freed from the shadow of suspicion, gathered for what they hoped was the final time. Eleanor Ashbourne, her gray dress a symbol of mourning, sat with a quiet strength. Lionel, his earlier defiance replaced by a subdued gratitude, held Clara's hand, her face still marked by the strain of her emotional confession. Victor Crane, his bluster returning but tempered, stood beside Beatrice, whose cool exterior seemed to hide a flicker of introspection. Lady Margaret, her sharp gaze undimmed, observed the room with her usual acuity. Dr. Mortimer, calm and thoughtful, seemed to carry a weight of quiet reflection, while Percy Vale, his ambitions chastened, sat with a blank notebook, his earlier confidence a distant memory. Inspector Japp, bustling with the satisfaction of a case closed, was preparing to depart for London with Miss Lavinia Grey in custody, but Poirot had insisted on one last gathering. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice a gentle but commanding cadence. "The crime at Greystone Manor is solved, the guilty unmasked, the bonds returned. Miss Grey's confession has brought justice, but Hercule Poirot does not leave a case until every thread is woven into place. There are questions, small but significant, that linger, details that, when understood, complete the picture of this tragedy." Japp, adjusting his hat near the door, sighed. "More threads, Poirot? You've got your killer, the bonds, and a confession. What's left to fuss over?" Let's leave these folks in peace." Poirot's smile was serene but resolute. "Mon cher inspector, peace comes only when the truth is whole. The murder of Sir Reginald, the theft of the bonds, these are solved, oui, but there are echoes in this house, connections that must be clarified. Let us tie these final threads." He turned to the group, his eyes sweeping over their faces. The rose petal, the missing glass, the sedative. These were Miss Grey's tools, but there is one detail that puzzles Poirot. The shadow in the corridor seen by Madame Clara. It was Miss Grey, oui, but why did she move toward the garden door? Clara, her voice trembling but steadier than before, spoke up. I don't know, Monsieur Poirot. It was so dark and I was frightened. I saw the shadow moving that way, but I couldn't see who it was until you proved it was her." Poirot nodded, his gaze softening. "Your fear, madame, was the key to her confession. But the garden door, it was locked, as Monsieur Jenkins confirmed. Why then did Miss Grey move toward it? This is the thread we must follow." He turned to the butler, who stood deferentially at the door. "Monsieur Jenkins, the garden door key. Sir Reginald kept it, oui? Was it found on his body?" Jenkins nodded. "Yes, sir, in his pocket, as always. The police recovered it after the murder." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Bon. So the door was locked, the key secure. Miss Grey could not have used it to escape. The shadow, then, was a ruse. A deliberate act to confuse, to suggest an intruder fleeing to the garden. But why the petal? Why place it in the study? Eleanor, her brow furrowed, ventured, "To make us think someone came through the window, as you said. But could there have been another reason?" Poirot's smile was approving. "Perceptive, mademoiselle. The petal was a misdirection, oui, but it was also personal. Miss Grey in her pain chose a symbol, a rose, a thing of beauty like the love she felt for Sir Reginald, now turned to thorns by his betrayal. She plucked it earlier, perhaps during her duties, and placed it in the study to mark her act, to leave a piece of her heart in the crime." Lady Margaret's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "A romantic notion, Monsieur Poirot, but a foolish one. If she loved him, why kill him?" Poirot's expression was wistful. "Love, madame, is a powerful force, but when scorned it can turn to hate. Miss Grey's love was unrequited, her loyalty unrewarded. The petal was her signature, her cry of pain. But there is another thread, the missing glass. Why take it from the corridor tray?" Victor Crane, his voice gruff, spoke up. "You said it was to hide the sedative, right? She didn't want any trace of it found." Poirot nodded. "Oui, Monsieur Crane, but there is more. The glass, it was not just to hide evidence. It was to replace the brandy glass. Miss Grey poured the sedative into the brandy, but she feared the residue might be detected. She took a glass from the tray, used it to pour the brandy, and left the original glass in the study, half full, to seem natural. The missing glass she disposed of, perhaps in her room, perhaps elsewhere." Beatrice's tone was cool but curious. "And did you find it, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "The police, under my suggestion, searched Miss Grey's room thoroughly. A shard of glass was found in her wastebasket, wrapped in a cloth. It was from the missing tumbler, broken to conceal its purpose. This, mes amis, is the final proof of her meticulous planning." Dr. Mortimer, his voice thoughtful, added, "Her attention to detail was remarkable. It's almost tragic how such a mind turned to murder." Poirot's gaze softened. "Tragic, oui, Monsieur le Docteur. Miss Grey's mind was sharp, but her heart was wounded. The final thread, it is this. Her crime was not just against Sir Reginald, but against herself. She destroyed her own future in her quest for vengeance. Percy Vale, his voice hesitant, spoke up. But Monsieur Poirot? Could anyone else have been involved? Her plan was so precise. Could she have had help? Poirot's smile was firm. A question I considered, Monsieur Vale, but the evidence, the petal, the glass, the sedative, the bonds hidden in her desk, all point to one mind, one hand. Miss Grey acted alone, driven by her own pain. The little gray cells, they confirm this. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them. Hastings, his pen moving swiftly, felt the case's complexity resolve into a poignant clarity. Poirot had tied the final threads, leaving no loose ends, no unanswered questions. As the guests absorbed the revelations, Poirot turned to Hastings. Mon ami, the case is complete. The threads are woven, the truth whole. Greystone Manor may now heal, though its scars remain. Hastings nodded, his voice low. You've done it again, Poirot. You saw the heart of it all, the petal, the glass, the pain. Poirot's smile was modest. The heart, Hastings, is where the truth lies, and Hercule Poirot, he always finds it. He turned to the group, his voice gentle but firm. Mes amis, let this be your lesson. Guard your hearts, for they can lead to salvation or ruin. Adieu. With a final bow, Poirot prepared to depart, leaving the manor to its future, its secrets now fully unraveled. Chapter 15. The Quiet Departure. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds over Greystone Manor, casting a gentle warmth over the Kentish estate, as if nature itself sought to soothe the wounds of the past days. The library, with its towering bookshelves and lingering scent of polished wood, was quieter now. The tension that had gripped it replaced by a somber calm. The arrest of Miss Lavinia Gray for the murder of Sir Reginald Ashbourne and the theft of the million-dollar bonds had closed the case, yet the manor's inhabitants seemed to carry the weight of its truths. Hercule Poirot, his small figure immaculate in a perfectly tailored suit, stood near the fireplace, his mustache a precise crescent, and his green eyes reflective. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated at the oak table with his notebook, felt a bittersweet satisfaction. The puzzle was solved, the threads tied, but Poirot's final act was to leave the manor with a lesson that would linger long after his departure. The remaining guests gathered for what they knew was Poirot's farewell. Eleanor Ashbourne, her gray dress a symbol of mourning, sat with a quiet resolve, her eyes bright with gratitude. Lionel, his earlier defiance now a distant memory, held Clara's hand, her face softened by relief but still marked by the ordeal. Victor Crane, his bluster fully returned, stood beside Beatrice, whose cool exterior hid a flicker of introspection. Lady Margaret, her sharp gaze softened by the case's resolution, sat with regal poise. Dr. Mortimer, calm and reflective, seemed to carry a deeper understanding of the human frailties exposed. Percy Vale, his ambitions subdued, sat with a closed notebook, his earlier confidence replaced by humility. Inspector Japp, his satisfaction tempered by Poirot's brilliance, stood near the door ready to escort Miss Grey to London. Mes amis, Poirot began, his voice a gentle melody rich with the cadence of finality. The affair of Greystone Manor is complete. The murderer is unmasked, the bonds recovered, the truth revealed. Yet Hercule Poirot does not depart without a final word. For a crime, it is not just a puzzle to be solved. It is a mirror of the soul, reflecting its desires, its pains, its choices. Today we look into this mirror one last time. Jap, adjusting his hat, gave a wry smile. You've done your bit, Poirot. Miss Grey's locked up, the bonds are safe, and the family can move on. What's left to say? You've outdone yourself as usual. Poirot's smile was modest but resolute. Mon cher inspector, the work of the little grey cells is not only to catch the guilty but to illuminate the path to truth. The tragedy of Miss Grey, it is a lesson for us all, a lesson in the fragility of the heart and the danger of betrayal. He turned to the group, his eyes sweeping over their faces. This manor, it was a stage for ambition, for loyalty, for love turned to hate. Let us reflect on what it teaches. Eleanor, her voice soft but steady, spoke first. Monsieur Poirot, you've given us justice, but also clarity. Uncle's death, it was a shock, but your words about betrayal, they make me see him differently. He wasn't perfect, was he? Poirot nodded, his gaze gentle. Non, mademoiselle, Sir Reginald was a man of vision, but also of flaws. His promises made lightly broke hearts, Miss Grey's most of all. Her love, unacknowledged, turned to vengeance, but the fault was not hers alone. This house, it bred mistrust, and mistrust bred murder. Lionel, his voice low, added, I hated him for his threats, for holding the inheritance over me. But I see now how he pushed everyone away, even Miss Grey. Clara, her eyes glistening, whispered, I feel sorry for her in a way. She was so quiet, so loyal. To think she loved him. Poirot's expression was wistful. Oui, madame, love, it is a flame that warms or burns. For Miss Grey it burned, and in that fire she lost herself. The rose petal, the sedative, the stolen bonds, these were her cries of pain, her attempt to reclaim what she felt denied. Victor Crane, his tone gruff but thoughtful, spoke up. Reginald was a tough negotiator. I didn't see it as personal, but maybe I should have. Maybe we all pushed her to the edge. Beatrice's voice was cool but softer than usual. We all played a part, didn't we? By ignoring her, by letting Reginald's games go unchecked. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Précisément, madame. A crime, it is never the act of one alone. The seeds are sown by many, by silence, by indifference, by ambition. Miss Grey was the hand, but the heart of this crime was shaped by all of you. He turned to Lady Margaret, whose sharp features had softened slightly. Madame, you saw Sir Reginald's flaws. Did you ever warn him of the dangers of his ways? Lady Margaret's lips twitched, her voice dry. I tried, Monsieur Poirot, but Reginald was a man who heard only what he wished. His pride was his downfall and Miss Grey's. Dr. Mortimer, his voice calm, added, I saw her withdrawal, her quiet anger. I should have spoken up, perhaps, but we all looked away. Poirot nodded, his gaze sweeping the room. To look away, mes amis, is to invite tragedy. The little grey cells, they see what the heart ignores. The petal, the glass, the shadow, these were not just clues, but cries for attention. Miss Grey's crime was her final plea, and now she pays the price. Percy Vale, his voice hesitant, spoke last. You saw it all, Monsieur Poirot. How do you do it? See what we miss? Poirot's smile was gentle. The mind, Monsieur Vale, it must be orderly, like a garden well tended. The little grey cells, they arrange the facts, the emotions, the lies, until the truth blooms. But it is not enough to see, it is to understand, to feel the human heart behind the crime. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them like the mist outside. Hastings, his pen still, felt the depth of the moment. Poirot had not only solved the crime, but had given the manor a chance to heal, to learn from its mistakes. As the guests absorbed his words, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, the case is closed, the lesson given. Greystone Manor will carry its scars, but it may yet find peace. Our work here is done." Hastings nodded, his voice low. "You've changed them, Poirot. They'll never forget this." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Nor should they, Hastings. The truth, it is a gift and a burden. Let them carry it well." He turned to the group, his voice firm but kind. "Mes amis, Hercule Poirot bids you adieu. Live with truth, and let this manor be a place of light, not shadows." With a final bow, Poirot walked toward the door, his steps light but purposeful. Hastings followed, glancing back at the library where the guests sat in quiet reflection. The manor's secrets were laid bare, its wounds exposed, but in Poirot's departure there was hope for renewal. As they stepped into the waiting car, the drizzle ceased and a faint rainbow arched over the hills, a silent promise of brighter days.